I think that Los Angeles is kind of more almost of an idea than a place. I think especially for somebody coming from the East Coast, you know, being able to see the whole sky in the middle of a city, all this stuff like still kind of blows my mind every day, the spread out nature of it. But I think that the thing I like about LA is that it's kind of a contradiction. So it is both very sunny, happy, glammy, beachy, waves in your hair, flip-flop place with celebrities everywhere. Completely true. Absolutely true. Not even exaggerated. But it's also like this crazy dark place where like all kinds of like violence and corruption and nonsense goes on. And I feel like that is, I mean, you don't want that, but let's say you have it. It's delicious that it's underneath the surface that's so sparkling and so exceptionally pleasant. And then you have, I think the movie Chinatown was basically a documentary. And that's kind of the situation here. And I love that. That's, I think, my favorite thing.
Well, the important thing to keep in mind is that Los Angeles in no way represents the original environment, for example, for the moving picture culture. It's more like Los Angeles appropriated that role through the development of Hollywood and through the way how Hollywood, in some sense, came to sort of like create, shall we say, simulated fantasy version of that city. So there is a very interesting and sort of like intimate relationship between of course, the film industry and Los Angeles itself. But we can, in a certain way, say that film industry manufactured Los Angeles as part of its own dream image. Mm-hmm. But basically, the moving picture culture started in other places in Europe. It started in the east coast of the United States. At the time when Los Angeles was really very underdeveloped area, so around 1900. But yes, I think that it would be very difficult to sort of like separate the film industry and the almost global, not quite, but almost global association of Hollywood, whatever that means, with the city of Los Angeles.
That means cities are going to have to accept where the cultural tourism can't be stopped because there's too much money in it. And that's where a lot of the banking is and investment capital is, and set up second phases. And that's what these cities like Los Angeles are discovering, that they need 2 or 3 phases, because some phases simply have been globalized to the point where it's beyond description. And one of the phases people are looking at are the abandoned industrial infrastructures, the mistakes the factories left out, and so on. And how...
I think this is the new global cultural and business crossroads, and there's enormous potential here in terms of people coming together from all over the world. And I'm amazed the people I meet in Dubai and Abu Dhabi from all corners of the world who come here for one reason or the other because of the openness and the infrastructure and the vision.
There was only one way to go with the Land Rover, and you had to go on the coastal from Dubai until Ajman, so it was a journey. You know? Yeah. There was no car, a small car could go. I mean, there was no road, that's the reason. So it was taking hours to reach there. And when the road was built, that time there was no traffic, I could go from Dubai to Sharjah in 10 minutes.
I think the change kind of moves in 2 directions. One is an acceleration, which means more people are getting involved in projects and there's a growth, and the other one is a deceleration. Things are closing down. people are leaving. So you have both. You have people coming and people going. And in the 2 years that I've been here, I've witnessed this. So there's that ephemeral or transience of Dubai. I've definitely grasped it in a very different way that it exists in, big cities like New York. It's like something that you can't really maybe, capture in maybe a sentence. Maybe I can't say articulately here, but I've witnessed people coming and going because of changes in businesses and construction and identities and corporate identities, I would say.
The reason that we're able to have this discussion, which is so diverse and we've all come from different places, is because we're at the point of genesis has, it's become solidified, and we can actually start to validate some of those stories and learn from them. And I actually think that this idea of whether it's Disney or 21st century, forget the superhighway, forget the, man, whatever car, things happened here which have never happened in human history before in such rapidity. The Dutch reclaimed land in the 17th century, 1600s. That's the only comparison that we have historically to the change that Dubai has done to the land. Everything else is unique.
We don't have the soft landscape. We don't have, the hill with the cypress trees that kind of makes it a bit more bearable. That's what we have, and we have it laid against asphalt. Yeah, and we have laid it against asphalt. We really value the stories around the creek, even though it's not relevant to us anymore. But we value, that accidental 4 or 5 palm trees next to each other that where the location where a track go. And probably in retrospect with other cities, maybe greener cities, they were like, what are these silly people talking about? We're chopping off forests to build cities. And for us, one accidental gaff tree on an interchange is worth talking about, because we are in dire need of scale, to be in touch with our physical surrounding. And this is where we get in conflict with progress, or the way progress is going, at least, I think.
A 1 billion dirham library in the shape of an open book is expected to open in Al Jadaf. Will hold more than 1.5 million volumes, 1 million audiobooks and 2 million ebooks, making it the world's largest electronic collection and the biggest library in the Arab world.
The thing with palm trees that were really beautiful is you would inherit the palm trees. So the palm trees, not the land didn't matter. So you wouldn't count the land, the mark. So if I pass away, I inherit my children 30 palm trees, and they can move or whatever. And the water, there was a science between water rationing and how much allotted, and there's taxes on the water.
I think cities have a balance until they fall apart. I think we need to understand where that point is, because there's a point we can, if we want to live the way we live, like what you mentioned with indoor, outdoor, really celebrating the landscape. But, LA never looked outside of the US, which is a sad story, because LA actually has a lot to learn from other cities in the world, more than it learned from Chicago and New York, because it has a different trajectory. You go from a boulevard, just like Wilshire Boulevard with all the skyscrapers, directly behind that you have residentials, directly behind that you have retails, you have restaurants, you have other things. Somehow things allowed to mix together and work all right. Density is manageable. We're not looking for the highest density. We just look at managed density.
I live in a Frank Gehry designed artist studio on what was the Grand Canal of Venice. It's now called Abercrombie Boulevard. But that was the Grand Canal of Venice. The whole concept of Venice was basically a real estate swindle by Abercrombie. And the city ended up coming in and filling in his big folly and creating what we now know as Venice. They paved all the canals over.
So one of the projects was Mel Chen. So Mel Chen asked a handful of landscape architects to develop an 18-foot by 18-foot plot using a vocabulary of indigenous and drought-tolerant plants that he selected. Right? So people like me volunteered to get an original blueprint, and we promised that we would actually plant that on our property. So conceptually, there's 100 of these patches throughout Los Angeles. It's a gesture. It's just a gesture. It's not going to solve everything. But that particular festival, I think, turned on a lot of people to places like the Theodore Payne Foundation and the Friends of the Alley River. And yes, these are organizations that have very limited budgets that, you know, are probably just helping out a handful of people in this ginormous metropolis of ours. But it has to start somewhere, right?
Los Angeles, it fits the framework of public transportation starting nowhere and going nowhere.
But faster.
But faster.
When I came here, one of the buildings I most wanted to see was the Bradbury Building.
Yeah.
Because
for all the reasons.
For all the reasons. And so I found it. And I have to say, that led me on reading about the history of the Bradbury Building. So a movie led me to the history of downtown LA and what it was over 100 years ago.
The most interesting thing to me, I lived in Egypt for 5 years, was that Hollywood created Egypt Mania and makes it into a kind of a centralized myth.
It was based on the discovery of King Tut's tomb in the 20s.
And it's also how much mascara Elizabeth Taylor used.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the myth becomes the reality.
Which has always been the case of the history of storytelling in the world. King Arthur didn't exist. But his influence is still bigger than the real queens today.